Is it on? It's on. Oh, good evening. Great turnout. Thank you very much for coming. I'm excited. I hope everybody else is. The men's group heard about this opportunity a little while ago, and as the coordinator of God's men's group, I sort of took the bull by the horns and invited Nelson Deuitch, who is our speaker for the next 6 weeks or so, to come and give us this lecture series. Very, very exciting. It's an historical geography of the Middle East. Right back, as you can see from our first session tonight, is on Alexander the Great. So it's going right back there. I'm so excited. So without further ado, because you haven't come to see me, please welcome to Grand Valley Church of Christ, Nelson Deuitch.
When it comes to technology, I am out to lunch. I'm out to lunch on so many things. We're going to try to do this in 6 sessions. And geography to me is very important. It's like when you tell somebody about Grand Valley, of course, if they've never heard of it or anything, how do they know anything about it? But we learn about geography when we can tie events in with that or something special. So the very last page on these sheets, that I showed you, that have been given to you, if you'll take a look at that picture, and I just want to bring this point across to you. This place is located not too far from Jerusalem. As you're heading down towards the Dead Sea, you look over and you can see this mound there. What is this mound? That's the place where Herod the Great was buried. And so he had that all fixed up as a place where he could go. Now, he was not a nice man, as you know. Now, I want you to look at that stairway there. Why would the stairway be that way? Anybody have an idea? So, yes, but why do you go up in the way that stairway is? Most people are right-handed. If you're carrying a spear and you're on the attack and you're going up the stairway, yes, you want to be a left-handed person going up a stairway like that. So in antiquity, this is the way they built the fortresses, and this is why they put the stairways that way. Now, there's just so many things. Some of them are just little things, but many times there's some great importance as to why they did things, in a certain way. Now, today we're going to be looking at some key things about, I call it the Holy Land, or you can call it Israel, or you can call it Palestine. All of those names mean the same to me personally. Now, to some people, of course, they want to differentiate between some of those terms. But to me, those are all the 3 same terms describing the same land. So we want to talk about a few things in connection with the Holy Land, and then I want to get you into Alexander the Great and what he did, and that's going to take us in a much bigger picture than just Israel itself. Now, when you think of Israel, it is the hub of that territory. Anybody that was in Egypt, and if they were going to go somewhere often, they were going to go on the direction to where they were going right through Israel. And the same way, whether it was the Persians or the Babylonians or whoever from Assyria, they are coming down and they're going right through Israel. Now, how, I got to figure out which one of these, which way I press this thing. Wrong way. All right. So let me talk about this. This, of course, when you're down in Egypt, you see the Nile River there. And then you see all of the many outlets or inlets, of this. Of course, the river is coming from down below here. And so the river is dumping water through all of those areas. So when you were in Egypt, the water came from the Nile. That's where the farmers got all of what they needed. So they didn't think about God giving them rain or giving them dew. In Israel or in Egypt, it was the Nile that was the source. So, of course, they worshiped the sun god, they worshiped the moon god, they worshiped crocodiles, they worshiped frogs because they were in the Nile River. I sort of laugh when I read about, remember what God did to them in the 10 plagues? One of those plagues was frogs. So he gave them frogs right up to their ears. I don't know how much of a worshipful attitude they were in, when they got all those frogs. But the Nile River was essential to the Egyptians. And so let me get to another picture here. Now we go to Israel itself. And Israel, remember, was this bridge between Mesopotamia and Egypt. Mesopotamia comes from two Greek words. Potamos is river, and Meso is in the midst of. So there were two main rivers in Mesopotamia. One was the Tigris, and the other one was the Euphrates. And so that's why it's called Mesopotamia. But anyway, Israel was the bridge between that. So many things, of course, happened in Israel. It is a small place. Now, in these papers that I handed out to you, it gives you more accurate links and distances and so forth. But I want to just give you some general figures so you can try and get a little bit of an idea. Now, I grew up in the U.S., so I learned my Bible geography there. So many times I will talk to you in miles. But you'll find in this paper where, if for those of you that think in kilometers and so forth, you'll find the equivalent, written in here. But from Dan to Beersheba, those were the dimensions of Israel. From Dan to Beersheba is 150 miles. So, this is not a long distance. When you are on the edge here, if I can get this pointer to work right, when you're on the edge right up here and you go from that area over to the Sea of Galilee, that's only about 50 kilometers. Wait, no, it's 30 miles. Yeah, that would be right. 30 miles, about 50 kilometers. So, this is not a large distance, when you're going from the edge there over. When you're down here in this area right here, you're around Gaza down here, and you go over to the Dead Sea, that's about 87 kilometers. I remembered that one in kilometers. It's 54 miles. So again, this is not a long distance. Do you remember, speaking of Gaza, Do you remember when Samson was there in Gaza? And he was not there for a good reason, I can tell you that, those of you that know the story. But somewhere in the middle of the night, he decided, I got to get out of here. And so, of course, the gate was closed. So what did the scripture tell us? What did he do? He grabbed a hold of the gate, and he picked that whole gate up, post and all, and then he carried it to Hebron. Now, let's see if we can find Hebron up here. So Hebron is right there. So remember, by mileage, that's not a huge distance. But when you're carrying something that heavy and you're going up a very steep hill and getting over there, that when you read that passage about what Samson did then, start thinking about the geography. I mean, that was a tremendous feat to carry that whole thing. And of course, he's mad at the people in Gaza. Gaza has had all kinds of problems, as we know, even here recently. And Alexander the Great gave it some big problems. We'll get into that, in a little bit. But back to the areas here. Now, you have the Jordan River. As it comes down and gets into the Dead Sea, from the bottom of the, not the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, that's a distance of, again, a ballpark figure, 60 miles or 100 kilometers. Now, the Jordan River, though, so we have this picture in here of the Jordan River in the back part of the paper that you have that shows the Jordan River. And it goes all over the place. So it covers about 200 miles in that distance of like the 60 miles. So it's all over the place. Just before it goes into the Dead Sea is what's called the jungle. In that area, I'm talking about going way back, even before, Moses sent the children of Israel into the Holy Land. Before that time, we know that there were rhinoceroses in there. They found bones, There were elephants. There were crocodiles. So, this was a real jungle. And it was that way for quite a while. By the time you get to the time of David, they don't have any elephants in there or hippopotamuses, but they do have lions and they have bears. And we know about that because David killed both of those animals, and that's probably exactly where they came from, was that jungle area. So even though this is such a small land, there's so many wonderful things about it and unique things. Now, what about the weather there? There are 2 seasons. We say that we have 4 seasons, but we know many times why the in-between seasons don't seem like much. But it's even worse there. So when you go from one 6-month period to the other 6-month period, now we call it winter. Their winter, though, is the rainy season. So the rainy season starts, it can start in late October, it may even be November, could even be Christmas time before the rainy season starts. But it's 6 months. So they have rain. So they don't have snow, except very rarely. When my wife and I visited there in '98, we were there in the latter part of March. And guess what? It snowed. And in Jerusalem. And so it never snows down in the Jordan Rift Valley. One time in all of history that they know, it snowed in Jericho, and that was in 1950. And they got I can't remember, 6 inches or something like that. You know, it was a decent snowfall. But it does not snow in that Jordan River Valley area. But you can get snow in the higher areas, but it's very rare. When the snow hit in March of 1998, I stepped out of the front doors of the hotel where we were staying, and it's this about 1.5 inches of the wet, slushy stuff. Nobody has a shovel. There are no snow plows there. So our tour group of about 45 people, they're saying, we can't go anywhere. Nothing can move because of this snow. That is a very rare thing for it to happen. Now, over on the other side of the Jordan Rift Valley, where the Jordan River goes down through, let me point out to that again. So over on this side, right here, this is the Transjordan Plateau, and it's high over there. So when you're over there, to give you an example here, in Moab. So over here is, wrong button again. So you see Moab right there? Now, boy, I'm really messing things up. Okay, so here is Moab. You remember Ruth and Naomi. Let's start with her. She left Bethlehem with her husband and 2 sons. And then, of course, she lost her husband and she lost her 2 sons. And she ended up with Ruth. And they came back to Bethlehem from Moab. Now, stop and think about what kind of walk that would have been. Moab is 5,000 feet up in the air, 5,000 feet above sea level. What is the Dead Sea? The Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level. 1,300 feet. That's the lowest spot on the face of the earth. I've been to the lowest spot on the face of the earth. I've stood there. I've never been to the highest one. I've never wanted to try and make that trek. But it was nice to stand there by the Dead Sea, you know, and you're 1,300 feet below sea level. And it is that's 400 meters. So those of you that think only in meters, why? But it is another 1,300 feet deep. So it is a very deep lake. Of course, it has so much salt in it that anything that gets dumped into it dies. So that's why it's called the Dead Sea. Or it also has the name the Salt Sea. Now there are 4 wadis, or rivers, that separate on the Transjordan Plateau. So see if I can find one of them. So up here, this is the Yarmuk. Then there's another one down here, and another one down here, and then another one down here. In your sheet paper, why, it gives you the names of them. The Zered is down at the bottom. Each of these wadis, or down in the low spots down there, they're called wadis. A wadi was a dry riverbank a good portion of the time. But it could suddenly become a raging storm. One of my professors at Princeton Theological Seminary was was telling us in class one day. He said one of my friends was leading a group there. And the next one from the bottom going on up is the Arnon. And I think it was in the Arnon that he was talking about. Anyway, this group was in the Arnon, and then all at once, water came rushing down through it, and 2 ladies in that group died. So this can be a very dangerous situation, these wadis. But those 4 wadis divide things, so that can tell you where Moab is and where Edom and where Ammon, because it's the top line could be, where Moab is, say, and then you have the other wadi down at the bottom that tells you those are the boundary lines for those different groups. Okay, I wanted to point out to you back on the coastal plain. With the coastal plain, there is no storm-proof harbor there. So ships could not be there. Herod the Great finally built one, and it didn't work very well. We'll talk about that later. But there's no storm-proof harbor on the coast there. So you had to get up to the city of Tyre, where they had places where they had ships. And Tyre, actually, that was we'll call it the shipping capital of the world back then. Tyre controlled all of the shipping in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And so that's why that little place of Tyre was so important, because they controlled all of the shipping. Plus, Tyre was where they had the purple dye. That special purple dye that was extremely expensive. Remember in the book of Acts, Thyatira, she was a seller of purple. But anyway, the coastal plain is very fertile. I'm going to give you a very scientific definition now about how you dealt with the dry period. Remember, I told you that you have 2 main seasons. You have what they would call winter there, but it's the rainy season. And you have the dry season. The dry season is no rain. Did you get that? No rain. Now, when you say that no rain, you can't say that entirely, because yes, on occasion it does rain. But during that 6-month period of time, which would be from about March, April, getting in there, and then going to October or so when the rainy season would start again. During that time, there is no rain. Now, they grow crops. So then, if you're a farmer, you have to say, how in the world did they grow crops? No rain. And the answer to that was dew. Now, I'm going to give you a very scientific answer. I see Neil down here. He's a young guy. We're going to be a whole bunch of us. We're all going to grab 2 big 5-gallon pails of water. We're going to stick them in the Mediterranean Sea, and we're going to carry them to the top of the hill. So draw a line down through the center here. So here's our water point, our water dividing line. So now remember, it goes up real high here. Now, some of these distances that I was telling you about, like getting from where it's Akko up there, that little point sticking out, which is Mount Carmel, from that area right there over to the Sea of Galilee, again, is only about 30 miles or 50 kilometers. And so you may say, now, we're talking about as the crow flies. Yeah, in distance. But if all it is mainly going uphill big time all the time, you know, and it mainly can only be like 10 kilometers, but if you're going uphill all the time, this is tough. And so you're going up a hill here pretty good. So again, Neil has got his buckets. And then somebody old like me, you know, I've got 2 buckets. Now, I got to knock some of my water out right away before we even get started, you know, trying to carry those things. So we are all carrying water going up those hills. So what happens to the buckets of water that we have? I've lost most of mine before I even get very far. So where's your most fertile area? Right in the coastal plain. Because Nelson and others like me, we lost all of our water right there. Neil, of course, he gets halfway up and he's still going pretty good. Now, but even he loses some of the water. And then by the time he gets up to the top, why, he's lost a fair portion of his water in his buckets. But the water that he has left, he decides, okay, I'm going to throw it towards the Jordan River area, and he gives it a mighty heave. And where does that water land? The wind catches it and carries most of it way over to the other side, the Transjordan Plateau. Okay, that great scientific explanation, you know, helps you hopefully to understand dew. Dew comes from the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, and of course it waters very well on the first part going up till you get up to that water parting line that I'm talking about. And then it's still, the wind is taking it on up, and then that water keeps right on going. Now, yes, some of it drops over on the other side, but by the time you get down to the Jordan River area, no water, no dew there. So this is not the best place, you know, for you to try to plant stuff. But some of that water gets blown, some of that dew gets blown clear over to the high land. Remember the 2.5 tribes that when they first went in and they're being led, 2.5 tribes stayed on that Transjordan side. And the reason that they saw, oh, this land looks pretty good. It grows things, you know, pretty nice. So it's a nice area yet over there. So the very best farmland is where the dew coming in until it gets to the top of the hill, then it still drops some on down. So if you're going to buy a farm there and you've never seen the place or anything, you know which side of this hill that you want to be on. You want to be on the Mediterranean Sea side. So that's some geography stuff. Now, there's other geography stuff that is in these pages that I've given to you. So I'm going to skip. Well, I want to just mention one other thing. There's the worst thing that happens to them generally as far as a storm. Now, the worst thing that can happen here, we know back the last day of May in 1985, you know, something pretty bad, you know, came. But generally, the worst climactic thing that happens there, for some of the people online who may not know what happened, then that was a terrible tornado. I was here just a few days after that because Wendell and Fay Latham were good friends of ours, and so I was just devastated by seeing, what happened to the church here and what happened to other things. But anyway, the big climate thing that hits them in Israel is called a sirocco. And it's a hot sandstorm that comes from across the Jordan side over in the Transjordan Plateau area. And it comes from, because way on over there, that gets very quickly into desert, and especially down in the south. And so sometime, especially in the transition season, so one of those transition seasons usually happens at Easter time. So I know many times people say, oh, I want to go there for Easter. And that'll be a great time to be there. But this is one of the 2 times when you're more likely to get that sirocco. And it's what it does. The wind comes storming in it's coming from the east, going to the west, and it brings this real fine sand with it. And it is very unpleasant. So in general, during what we call summer, which is summer there, during that time in the Jordan River Valley area, why, it's hot and it's unpleasant. So that's not the best time, again, if you want to go there to go visit. Well, there's some more information in these pages that tells you about that. But right now, I need to get moving on to want to talk to you about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, I got very interested in him when I was just a young guy and started reading about a lot of the things, that went on with him. This is Alexander's empire. Now, when you look at it in comparison to the whole world today, now I hope you can point up here and see, you get over here to Great Britain and Ireland over here. So, and of course you have Russia here, and you have India and so forth. So today, when you look at Alexander's empire in the big picture, you say, oh, that's not much. But it was a lot back then. And so this is his empire. So his father was Philip of Macedonia, and in 359, Philip conquered the Greek states like Sparta and some of the others, that they had to be independent. And nobody was going to tell them what to do, So they always, and they get fighting with each other a lot. But he went and he conquered them. And when he conquered them, about 3 years later, he had a son born. And so in 356, Alexander, who became Alexander the Great, was born. And he died in 323, not far from his 33rd birthday. So he's not yet 33 before he died. But his dad got assassinated just before he turned 20. And at that point, of course, those Greek city-states like Sparta, right away they rebelled against him. They said, who's that young kid, he's not going to rule over us. But Alexander right away got the army, and he went after him. He went to Thebes first, and he destroyed everything in Thebes except for the house of Homer. Homer wrote the Iliad. That was Alexander's favorite book. Alexander was given a teacher by his father by the name of Aristotle. I think you've heard of him. How would you have liked to have had as your personal teacher Aristotle? So that's how he grew up, being taught by Aristotle. And anyway, when his father got killed, now, his father, first of all, he had married Olympia, and she was Queen Olympia. Now, they never had a real good relationship. As far as like spending the night together, why that rarely happened as their marriage went on. So it wasn't a real good marriage. When Alexander, I can't remember for sure, but I think he was around 16, why Philip took on a second wife. And of course, Alexander did not like her, and you can guess what Olympia, felt about that woman. So Philip ended up getting assassinated, and there are many of the historians think, that Olympia was behind that. But anyway, now Alexander is now the leader. He got all the Greek city-states again back under his authority, and then he got his army together, and with this army of 30,000 foot soldiers and 5,000 on horseback, the cavalry. So these 35,000 soldiers, they're going to be off, and they're going to conquer the world. And so this here shows where all they went. Now, I'm just going to point out three major battles that they had with the Persians. The Persians were the ones, remember, 150 years before the time of Alexander. Why, the Persians came very close to taking Greece and Macedonia. It's called the Battle of Marathon and the Battle of Thermopylae. One was in 490, the Battle of Marathon. 480 was the Battle of Thermopylae. Do you remember Esther? Esther's husband, his Greek name was Xerxes, but he's known in Scripture as Ahasuerus. And that was the second battle, that Esther's husband was the guy, attacking the Greeks at that point. Alexander grew up with a great hatred for the Persians because, of what they had done 150 years before him. So he's going to have battles with the Persians. The Persian leader at that time was Darius the Third. Darius the First is the one that's mentioned in the book of Daniel. He's in Daniel. Daniel 5, you can read about him. So let me point out the battle places. So Granicus was the first battle. The second major battle with the Persians was Issus. That's right in the corner where Antioch. Now, Antioch wasn't planted there. It was because of Alexander that Antioch got planted. But Antioch is right in that corner. That's where the second main battle took place. The third main battle is over here, Arbela, or it's also called Gaugamela. And that was the third main battle. So, of course, there were a whole bunch of battles along the way. Alexander's first thought was, I've got to take over the Ionian cities. The Ionian cities, one of them is Ephesus. The Ionian cities are right here. Right here. They're on this part right here. So That line right there is too far inland, whoever drew this line, because Ephesus is right out on the coast there. Now, of those Ionian cities, originally those were Greek cities. So long before Alexander came into the picture, these were Greek cities. But the Persians came and they took that area all over. And so Alexander says, we are going to free our Greek cities. So first of all, he had a battle when he first came across the Dardanelles. And there at Granicus, Alexander didn't have much of a problem defeating the Persians there. Darius himself was not present there. So then he started going down the coast and liberating the Ionian cities. I'll just mention to you about Ephesus. Now, it took him 7 months to get all of those cities. Some of them gave him a hard time, but like in the city of Ephesus, he took that real easy because there were many of the Greeks inside of that city who they were for Alexander. So they helped do in a lot of the Persian people that were in charge. So it was pretty easy for Alexander to take Ephesus. But some of the others, why, it was more difficult for him. One of the first Greek cities that Alexander took, though, there were Greek mercenaries that were fighting for the Persian army. A lot of the young Greek guys, they said, well, what can I do for a job? They could go to places like where the Persians were ruling, and they could say, I'll work for you, and they say, okay, we'll pay you, to be a soldier. So there were a lot of these Greek mercenaries that Alexander and his army now is Greek fighting against Greek. One of the first cities that Alexander took, when he got those Greek mercenaries that were fighting for the Persians, he sold them into slavery. And his own army did not like that because they said Greeks are free. Democracy and, self-government and freedom, these are all things that the Greeks held to. And so when Alexander sold these Greeks into slavery, they didn't like that. So Alexander never did that again later. They faced Greek mercenaries again, but no more selling them. Well, let's move on here. What did Alexander look like? If you Google that, you will see all different kinds of pictures of him. Well, of course, nobody had cameras back then. And remember, this is well over 300 years before the time of Christ. And so there were no pictures. Nobody really knows what he looked like exactly. But there were a lot of coins that were made. And on many of these coins, it commonly had this face right here. Now here I already mentioned to you about the father of Philip of Macedon and so forth, and Queen Olympus. Whoop. All right. Philip invented the phalanx. And this is one of the reasons why he got the other Greek city-states, because this is what you're going to face. Now, there were several different versions of this phalanx, but you're just looking at one section of this. Now, you have to remember there's going to be another one right beside of it on both sides, and then, depending on how many you had in your army. But 3 or 4 of the soldiers in the front, they're carrying a spear. And this long spear is about 14 and a half feet long. So you can imagine you've got these. Now this one here is 8 deep. And in some of the examples they had back then, why they were twice that deep. They were 16 deep. So, you know, you're gonna face something like this coming at you with those spears. Why, good luck for you. But anyway, that's what Philip invented, and that's one of the reasons that Alexander became so powerful, you know, with his army. So this is Ephesus. Now, this theater was there during the time of Paul, because remember in Ephesus, he was there for 3 years. Towards the latter part of his ministry there, the silversmiths got mad at him because he is ruining their business, because he's telling them those idols that you are making are worthless. And so they are mad at the Christians. So all of these silversmiths, they got a whole bunch of people behind them, and they all went to the theater in Ephesus. And this is the theater right here. So how far back that goes, now, you know, we're jumping from Alexander's time, we're jumping over 300 years, you know, to the time of Paul. But anyway, this theater right here, I've had good friends. I haven't been there myself, but I've had good friends that have visited this place. Lewis Foster, who was one of my teachers at the Cincinnati Bible Seminary, why Lewis Foster was telling about he and his son. He stood right down in the middle of this, and his son went way up on the top up there, and then he just spoke in a voice like I'm speaking right now. And they could be heard. So it's the acoustics of this place, they say, is just amazing. So if you ever get to Ephesus, go see this place. But Paul, well, he didn't make it in, but he, as you know, he was going to go in if the other Christians were saying to him, no, they're going to kill you if you go in there. So after Alexander got the Ionian cities, then he traveled around a bunch of other places, but he finally got over to where he's directly above Tarsus. Tarsus is not too far from where Antioch was, that corner of the Mediterranean Sea. You know, the Cyprus, the island there, it's got that finger pointing up right towards where Antioch ended up being. So Tarsus is not too far from that area. But Alexander and his army, they have to cross the Sicilian gates. There's 5 of these. This is through the mountain range right there. So this is one of those. So you can imagine trying to bring 35,000, soldiers through a place like this. A much smaller army of Persians, can stop them or at least hold them down for a fair period of time. So anyway, this is one of those gates. Here's another one of them. These are hefty gates. And again, just south of one of these gates where Alexander went through is Tarsus. And Alexander is bringing his army, and is what he did, he just went right up over the top with his army. And so he had tough soldiers. And boom, they just went right up over the top, and boom, they were right down on the plain area where Tarsus was. In the meantime, what was Darius III doing? Darius III had made plans We are going to wipe out Tarsus, and we are going to wipe out that whole area. So when Alexander and his soldiers, when they get there, they're not going to have anything to eat. They're not, it's just going to be one big ruined area. That's exactly what he was on his way to do, but Alexander beat him to the punch. Now, what does that mean to my thinking? Let's jump forward over 300 years. Where is Paul from? Tarsus. Now, where was his whole family background? Going back many generations. Were they from Tarsus? I don't know. As far as I know, nobody knows. But it's a possibility that his family was from there. What would have happened if Alexander hadn't gotten there first? Tarsus would have been, boom, wiped out. Nothing. No Paul. No Paul over 300 years later. Again, that's just speculation, so I don't really know about that, but that's just an interesting sidelight, of my thinking in this. All right, I'm pushing the wrong thing. Okay, so where's the next main battle? Think of the island again of Cyprus with the tongue, with that little thing sticking up. It's pointing right towards the area of where Antioch later was. Well, this is where the Battle of Essos took place. Alexander, this time Darius is there. And they have a big battle. But Alexander won the battle. And when he's winning, all at once, Darius, he took off. And he fled. Well, he left behind his wife, his mother, and his 2 daughters. Well, when the Greeks went and they saw the quarters and the way that Darius traveled, he traveled in a Mercedes, one of the top cars, He traveled in a beautiful car. Alexander the Great traveled in an old jalopy. His bed and his tent was, nobody said, oh, I want to be in this one here. No. But Darius's was beautiful. Well, of course, Alexander got a hold of that. Now, they were surprised to see all the plushness, of what Darius was traveling in. The only thing that Alexander himself took personally from that was a little book, or a little box, a little jeweled box where he could put his copy of the Iliad. Because every place Alexander went, underneath his pillow was always his coveted book, the Iliad, written by Homer. Some of you may know, about that book. I can't get into that right now. But that was his key book that was his Bible. So the other thing that he had under there was a dagger. So underneath his pillow. But he did get a little nice box, to put his thing in. Now, Darius's wife was beautiful. So Alexander never allowed himself to see her. She is going to, and the 2 daughters and the mother, they're going to be with him for a long time now as he's going on all this real long journey. Now, before I forget it, so that when we saw that map of where he went, all the way to India, that journey, according to the people that have followed this, is about 25,000 miles. 25,000 miles, and which is 40,000 kilometers. I mean, this is a long way. This is all the way once around the earth That's how far he went. Do you know who else traveled that far when you followed the path of the Apostle Paul when he went on his missionary journeys? Do you know who went further? Scholars say that Paul. Paul went further. Alexander went on a beautiful horse, Bucephalus. He got that horse when he was 13 years old. There's quite a story behind that, but I can't get into that. But this story, you know, with Paul went to conquer the world, but he went with a different method than Alexander the Great went. Which one was most effective? Well, to me, there's a very easy answer to that. Anyway, when this battle happened, why, Darius himself escaped, but Alexander ends up with his wife and family. They're all crying because they think Darius is dead. Alexander himself went to the mother, and he told the mother, he said, no, we didn't get him. You know, he's okay. So, but from then on, they traveled in his entourage. Alexander had far more than just 35,000 in his entourage. He had all kinds of people with him. Architects, steppers. Steppers were people who literally took one foot in front of the other and the next foot. They mapped out everything, you know. There were slave traders. There were just all kinds of other people, you know, that were going along with Alexander's army. So, but he treated Darius's family very well all the time. And so, anyway, the next place that he headed, I just threw this picture in because when you see pictures like this is a common one that I think probably several of you have seen before. It's Jesus and the two on the road to Emmaus. How far was Emmaus away from Jerusalem? It's just helpful to know some of the geography and stuff that goes along with it. Helps you understand Scripture a little more. That was about 7 miles, so roughly 11 kilometers or so. So anyway, this picture here depicts what the artist thought it looked like. That really is not a very good picture as to the terrain, as to what it looks like in that area. But I am thankful to these artists that help paint pictures and at least, you know, make us think about some of this. Well, he went on down to Tyre. When he got to Tyre, why, this is a picture of what the scholars think that Tyre looked like well before the time of Alexander. And you'll notice that there's some land around it. But of course, it is an island. It's 1 kilometer from the mainland there to the island of Tyre. And this is what they think it looked like, you know, a little more when Alexander the Great went after it. Well before the time of Alexander, there was a guy by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. He's Nebuchadnezzar the second, actually. And those of you that know the Scripture, why, you know what he did. He's the one that 3 times he came and attacked Israel. On the first time, that was about 606, 605 BC, they took Daniel, Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. On the second, in 597, the Babylonians came again. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar's not with them. He's sending the Babylonian army. They came again, and they took people on that second one. On that one, why, Ezekiel was taken, in that one. But then the big one was they came in 586. In 586 they came and they completely destroyed the city. And of course Jeremiah and other prophets had been telling them this is exactly what's going to happen. But it's the Babylonians now that came and they destroyed Jerusalem, and almost everybody except people like me, they probably left some of them there and said, they're not going to do any harm. But all the younger ones and the stronger ones, they were all carried off into captivity. Well, the thing that I want to point out to you is what happened here. Nebuchadnezzar had been trying to take Tyre for 13 years, and he wasn't able to get it. They finally ended up a peace agreement between them, but he couldn't get this place in 13 years. Alexander shows up here, and he takes it in 7 months. And so, but this was his longest battle. He never had a battle, that was anywhere close to this 7-month period, but it was quite a time. Oh, I got the archers. There were a lot of archers, back then. So both the Greeks, would have archers, and the people they're attacking, they would have archers. Both sides had catapults. And I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. This again is artists. So whether Tyre looked exactly like that, we don't know. But this can just give you a little bit more of an idea of, they're attacking this. He's attacking it from the causeway that he built. So Alexander built a causeway about 200 meters across going out. And of course, he can bring catapult machines up. I don't know about how strong the catapults were then. I know about the Romans. The Romans built catapults that would shoot 100-pound stones 300 yards. So we're talking I played soccer, 3 soccer fields long. So they could shoot 100-pound rock 300 yards. So Alexander also attacked it by boats too. He went up to Sidon and he pirated some boats from up there. So he's attacking it from land, from the causeway that he's building. He's attacking it from boats. But in 7 months, he got them. These are some of the rocks that they have found there in that area. So you can see different size. The little ones, that only gives you a headache for 2 days. The big ones give you a headache for 7 days, Well, you can imagine one of these things being thrown. As I said, I don't know whether the Greeks were as good as the Romans with their catapults, but they would have had one similar. But when you're firing one of those the length of 3 football fields and it hits you, this is a tough time. This is the ruins that are there at Tyre that you can go visit today. I don't know whether these ruins are from the Roman time, because the Romans, they started in around 200 BC, getting big powers and then coming down. It was a fair period of time before they got down in this area again. But they rebuilt Tyre, and they rebuilt several of the places in Israel too. We'll talk about that later. But the pavement here, this is the kind of pavement that you can see in ancient Jerusalem too. So, it would not have been, think about riding in a chariot or something, this is a little bit of a rough ride, on there. But whether these stones here were from the Roman time or whether it was from, You know, the original ones, no, I have no idea, but they would have been very similar. So, okay, after Tyre, he went to Gaza. Took him 2 months to get Gaza. Maybe Samson ran off with some of the gates for him, I don't know. But, of course, that definitely didn't happen with Samson. But took him 2 months there, and then he went on down to Egypt. And you see Alexandria there. So they founded the city of Alexandria. And there were at least 31 cities that were named Alexandria that were founded by him. But this, of course, is the most famous one. As time went on, it became Rome. When you're getting New Testament times now, the number one city in the biblical world at that point, of course, is Rome. Number 2 is Alexandria. And you might be real surprised at what number 3 was. Number 3 was Antioch. So Antioch, of course, you know, during Alexander's time, it doesn't exist. Alexandria ended up having a lot of Jewish people there. There were 5 areas of Alexandria. 2 of them were entirely Jewish. That's why those of you that know about the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that's why they translated it into Greek, because you've got all those Jewish people now, and they no longer know Hebrew anymore. So they speak Aramaic, because remember when they were carried, when Nebuchadnezzar carried them off into their land, Babylon and around in that area, they lost their language there. The language that they spoke there was Aramaic. So by the time you get to the New Testament time, of course, the common people they speak Aramaic. Only the scholars. How many in here know Greek? If I pass the Greek New Testament around to you, well, I'm not surprised. I did study Greek, but I'm not an expert in it, but I can read it with some help. But, the people in Jesus' time, they spoke Aramaic, but many of them spoke Greek. Why did they speak Greek? We're going to come to that a little later here. So, wait a minute. So anyway, when he got to Alexandria, then you see this point where it's way down right here. He didn't go there with his army. He went there just with a small group to hear the local person there who was I'll call him the soothsayer, the religious person, who was honored by all the people there. Of course, they believed in idols and so forth. But he would go there to hear what they had to say. But you can see how far did he go just to talk to that person? But that's some of the things that he did. Now he's taking off and he's going after Darius. And so remember, there's been 2 battles with the Persians, but now you're going to have the big 3rd battle. On the way after he left Egypt, there's a question among the scholars as, did he go to Jerusalem? Josephus, the Jewish historian, said yes, that he did. But none of the other historians say that he did that. So we really don't know for sure whether he went to Jerusalem or not. But the way that you go, I don't think I mentioned the roads to you, did I? When you're on the coastline of Israel, on that coastline, that's one of the 2 main roads. It's called the Way of the Sea, which, of course, you got the Great Sea right beside it. It's also called the Via Marius. So that's That's a main road. So when the Egyptian army was going to have a battle like with the Persians or the Babylonians or whatever, that's the road that they would take. When they got up by Mount Carmel, then they went through the plain there. We'll talk more about that later. I got to stay on Alexander here. So finally he got over to the area that's called Gaugamela, and it's also called Erebus. And when he got there, Darius is all prepared for him. He's got an army, according to some sources, of 300,000. Other sources say a little less than that. Alexander's army now, of course, is bigger because some of those Greek mercenaries have joined him and so forth. So the actual numbers, it's hard to tell. But Alexander is greatly outnumbered here. So at one of his main generals, Parmenion was his name, Parmenion said to him, "Let's attack them at night. We'll sneak up on them and we'll get them." And then Alexander says, "No, we're going to do this right, no sneaking up on them or something like that." So he laid down that night, and like he always did, he was able to sleep before the big battle. I can't even sleep sometimes before I'm going to get a tooth taken out, the next day or something like that. But Alexander, he would sleep, and the next day, boy, they had this huge battle. Darius had 15 elephants. Darius had this huge army, and so Alexander has 3 parts to his army. He's in the center. On his left and on his right, he's getting beaten. And so he decided, all right, we're going to go in the center. We're going to go with the phalanx right for Darius. And boom, boy, they made a big attack. And Alexander was always in the front of these fights. He wasn't standing back and saying, "Go get them." He was right there in the front going at them. And Darius again fled, took off, but Alexander completely defeated the Persian army, and this meant the end of, basically, now there's still going to be a lot of skirmishes going on, but the heart of the Persian army has been wiped out at this point. So Alexander's in complete control at this point. This is a picture of what this might have been, with the battle. Now here the numbers are 47,000 on Alexander, and the numbers are 250,000. So you have different numbers that are given, but whatever, Alexander was greatly outnumbered. All right, so after they left the battle up there, now that battle was up more in the area of Nineveh. You see the Tigris River there, and then the Euphrates. The Euphrates is a much longer river, than the Tigris. So Alexander is continuing his journey, and the first place he went to was Babylon. Babylon, remember, got destroyed. So it had been in ruins for like at least 200 years, when Alexander got there. The Ephesus River runs right through the center of it. This was considered the strongest city that the defense, here was just huge. The outside wall was 300 feet tall. You could put 2 chariots abreast going along on the top of this wall. And then if you get over that wall, then there was another wall on the inside. Of course, the river went right through it, but if you if you would say, okay, I'm going to attack them by the river, can you just imagine yourself, you got your weapons and so forth, and you jump in the water, and there were iron rods that went down from the wall that was going across the river that went down in there. So, then you're going to meet soldiers over on the other side. So that was no way of attacking it. Do you know who tells about how this city was destroyed? Book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, there was a writing on the wall. This is Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, if I remember his name right. Belshazzar is having a drinking party with his cronies, But then all at once there's some writing on the wall. Many, whatever it said, And of course, they're all shocked. What is this? What does it say? What does it mean? None of his soothsayers could tell what it is. So who do they get to come in? Daniel. Daniel came in and he told him. He said, this very night, you're going to be destroyed. Now, historians will tell you, nobody, Alexander couldn't have taken this in this strong city, in like one night. So many people think, the Bible's full of nuts, here or whatever, it's a bunch of goofballs that wrote that. Well, there are Greek historians by the name of Herodotus and Xenophon. These are two of the most famous Greek historians. So, this is not somebody like Nelson Deuitch, writing this. These are great historians, and they tell how this happened. They said that the Medes and the Persians, under Cyrus, the Medes and the Persians came, and this river is going from the top, of the map down towards the Persian Gulf. And this river, they went upstream, and they did a whole bunch of digging, and then when they were ready, they dug out the last part of it where the water was diverted. And so all at once the river dropped. And Cyrus and his soldiers marched right in there, and as they say, without firing a shot, they took it. That's what those two historians tell us. Again, unfortunately, the Bible doesn't tell us how it happened. It just says that it was going to happen. And it didn't say that it was going to happen sometime said it's going to happen tonight. So, thank goodness we have historians that, okay. These are the ruins now that you can see in Babylon, but when Alexander got there, he saw some ruins and he knew, boy, this is really something. So he said, when I'm finished with my campaign, military, this is where I'm going to rule the world from. And I'm going to come back and rebuild it. Do you remember what Scripture says about that, though? Scripture said it would never be rebuilt. And it never has. So, but Alexander was going to do it. So, well, they went on to Persepolis. When they got to Persepolis, Alexander hit this place with everything that he had. His own soldiers. Generally, when Alexander took a place, the thing that he did was he was very kind to the people. Once he got them, then he said, you're going to follow me and do what I say to you. And at that point, he often took the leader that was in charge there before and put him right back in charge. But of course, he said, you are now under Greek authority. And so, but when he got to Persepolis, he battered this place big time. And his own soldiers they wondered, why are we being so harsh to these people? But here's where Alexander was remembering the 150 years ago, the Battle of Marathon and the one at Thermopylae. And he said, we're going to pay you back for what you did to us back then. And so, anyway, why, they battered the place. These are some of the soldiers. Do you see the bows there? Those bows are what's called double recurve. So on the end of the bow, some of you, if you know archery, if you just take a regular stick and you just tie on one end and tie on the other end and then make it into a bow. But if you do it in this double recurve, can you see what I'm talking about? That little thing right there. So that is a much more powerful bow. And so I got to move on here on time. I'm sorry, I'm going way over. Well, this is ancient Persepolis. Now, this is a terrible picture. But the other modern pictures that I've seen, this has been built up. The Iranian people, they've built up all around this. So when you see their pictures, you're seeing it right beside of the modern places. But this is a picture that shows it more like, what it looked like, back then. So, well, there was a whole bunch more battles, and I can't keep going, into this because of time. But Alexander finally got to India, crossed the river there, and he had a battle with King Porus. King Porus had 200 elephants. This was a terrible battle. It's like two guys that have been in a big-time fist fight, and you look at both of them, and say, well, which one won, because this was bad. And that's exactly what it was for Alexander and his army. They won, but boy, they paid a huge price for it. And the soldiers that were left, they said to him, enough. We're not going to go 2 more feet, fighting. We want to go back home. They have been gone, pushing 11 years. So they've said, we've had enough. We just started to liberate the Ionian cities. That was our plan. But here we are. But 11 years later, this is it. We've had it. One interesting story with this, Nearchos. I see I've spelled it with an O at the end. It's commonly spelled with a U. So Nearchos was trained in the area of ships. But so they went down to the Arabian Sea, and they're starting from there. So there was a fair group of Alexander's army that got in boats. These boats are fishing boats now. They're not fighting ships. But most of Alexander's army went by way of land. On the boats, they could only have water for 5 days. So they said to Alexander, you've got to join up with us, on this trip so you can give us water and you can give us food. Well, Alexander never did see them until a long ways going by, on this trip. But a funny thing with Nearchos and people in those boats, as they're going along, all at once they saw this big enemy coming right towards them. And man, they got in battle formation with their fishing boats. I'm not sure what they were going to do, in those fishing boats. But Nearchos got them all in battle formation to get ready to take on this enemy that was coming at them. and then all at once the enemy disappeared. And then they gave offerings to their gods of thanking their gods for saving them from this enemy. You know what the enemy was? It was whales. They had never seen whales before, so they didn't know what in the world they were, you know. So, but anyway, they thanked their gods for that. Well, Alexander went back to Susa, and at Susa they had the great loving cup ceremony. This great loving cup ceremony, 80 of his officers and 10,000 of his soldiers, they married Persian women. Now, many of these marriages, they had picked up women along the way, some of these soldiers, you know, so those women were still following with them. So many of them, they were just burying the woman they already, you know, or had been paired up with. But during this marriage, this is where Alexander took a second wife. And it was, remember the two daughters of Darius? So one of them, Barsine, the oldest one, why he took her as his wife. And then his good friend Hephaestion married the other daughter. There was a movie on Alexander back, several years back. In it, they portrayed Alexander of having a wrong relationship with Gay, that he and Hephaestion, you know, were just like this, you know. And that's the movie. That's not the sources. The sources do not paint, in fact, there's evidence against that because one of his generals sent him a young boy to, you know, be his plaything. And Alexander was extremely angry at that guy for doing that. And so, as far as we know, you know, he didn't mess around with women. He didn't mess while he was in this 11-year battle campaign until he got at Sogdiana, which was fairly close to India. And that's where he married Roxanne. I don't have time to tell you about that. So, well, I'm going to try and come back to this slide the next time where I tell you after Alexander, you know, he went back to Babylon, and he wasn't there very long before he died before he's 33 years old. They think he died of malaria, but he got sick, and he lay sick for, I think, something like 8 days or something like that. Then he died. And Roxanne had become pregnant at that point, but, you know, she hadn't given birth yet. So soon after Alexander died, why then Roxanne killed the other wife. What I just told you what her name was, Barsine. Killed Barsine. And but later that son, you know, he ended up dying too. So Alexander never had any offspring that went on. Well, I apologize. I took way too much time trying to deal with Alexander. Now, I also left a lot out about Alexander. So next week, Trevor and Andy are going to see it that you have 10 pages. And so there's 10 pages of stuff that I have written on Alexander. Because one thing, I doubt that you can remember all these names, you know, that I mentioned and who did what and so forth. So I want you to do your homework. I want you to read these pages that you have been handed now so that you have information on that. And hopefully next time I'll try and ask you if you've got some questions, you know, about that. And then you will be given 10 pages, mainly on Alexander the Great, and there's something else in there. But I hope you will read that material, and Because again, the more you understand all of this and the way you can put the picture together. Now I want to come back to the Apostle Paul. What's the main thing that Alexander did that affects Christianity? What was the New Testament written in? Greek. Why did Greek become the common language for everybody? Even Latin could never the Romans could never get Latin to be the number one language. For 1,000 years after the time of Alexander, for 1,000 years, the common language is Greek. And that meant Paul and the apostles and others like him that were going place to place, they could give people a Greek lesson. You know, when Paul wrote, he wrote in Greek, and it was Alexander that, and of course his successors, you know, that gave Greek. So that's the big thing that Alexander gave to us, was Greek. Okay, I'd like to end with a word of prayer. Our Father, I know that I've thrown out a whole bunch of stuff here about Alexander and so forth, but there are so many things in this as we study geography and we study the history that goes along with this that can help us to understand your word in a better way. We thank you for the truth of your word and what Daniel had to say to Nebuchadnezzar's son, that tonight this place will be destroyed. There's so many truths in Scripture that we have, and we're thankful especially for these truths that tell us about Jesus and our Savior. We pray in his name. Amen. Okay. All right. No, thank you. The distance that Paul traveled was more than 25,000 miles. Paul traveled more. The known. Now, all we can do is the known path that Alexander took, which again, as I told you, is about 25,000 miles. But what we know from Paul's travels, he traveled further. And he didn't ride a horse. Yes, he was on a ship at times, but most of it was by foot.
So, ladies and gentlemen, there's coffee and biscuits. Go help yourself. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Lovely.